Hi, folks. I'm Michelle Mullen. Thank you for joining us today. Some people may still be signing on, and that's okay, but we try not to punish those that are here on time. So today's discussion is about bringing Hype on campus to your school. As a part of my team, I'm representing the larger Hype on campus. My larger team includes Catherine Sabella, Amanda Costa, who is also on the line, Debbie Nicolelis, Ian Lane, and Emily McCaffrey, who is also on the line. As I figured that we could probably skip a large part of housekeeping, but I do want to say a couple of words about that in a second. I do want to acknowledge our funder, Neidler, who is making this trial possible, as well as this webinar. If you folks are interested in learning more about our center, our website is here. For those of you who are just signing on, I just want to make a note, if you're having any technical difficulties, please email Amanda Costa. Here is her address, amanda.costa@umassmed.edu. If you're having any difficulties whatsoever, you can use the questions tab. If you want to speak directly to Amanda or Emily, who is helping with the technical side, please feel free to use that. The chat function. If you have any questions for me to answer, I encourage you to use the questions tab. So if something is unclear or if you want additional information, please feel free. We'll have a time at the end for some question and answers. But outside of that, I think we're going to get started. So if you have any issues, please feel free to email her, use the chat function, and use the questions for me. Okay, so today we're going to talk a little bit about Hype's background and our rationale. We're going to talk a little bit about the Hype on Campus project, the commitments from sites that we're looking for, timeline and next steps, and then some time at the end for any additional questions. But I do want to take a moment to thank you for coming. We are super excited about this project. Once again, my name is Michelle Mullen. I'm the developer of Hype, and I had the ability when I was a young provider to provide services to college students with mental health conditions. So this is kind of born from those experiences, as well as over time with some additional research that we've conducted and some tweaking to the model. So what is Hype on Campus? So Hype on Campus, well, Hype, the acronym stands for Helping Youth on the Path to Employment. And the purpose of Hype on Campus is to reduce academic disruption and enhance academic performance for college students with mental health conditions. So in Hype, kind of like this larger approach, is that we prioritize education early in order to enhance long-term work outcomes. The purpose of doing education early, as you guys know, is that you get better jobs and you're able to earn more money over time. So Hype really focuses on this kind of fluid career development that is typical for most young adults with or without mental health conditions, where it can support both employment and school at the same time. And we do this by really focusing on developing skills and then the consistent use of both those skills and supports. So Hype on Campus is grounded in theory, it's based in practice. It's kind of like the best of all worlds. Sometimes when you have academics that say, hey, we have this great thing, it's really just based in like what's the research or what seemingly is a good idea. So our project, our model is grounded in a theory specifically for young adults with mental health conditions, and particularly true for college students, which is self-regulated learning, which we'll talk about in a little bit. This service began back in 2003 at Rutgers in New Jersey, and was further developed to expand into community mental health, to be able to catch more young people and older people at that time, to help them get into school, stay in school, graduate, and get good jobs. And we've also tested this on campus. We have had a series of pretty successful research activities that have provided us with additional information about what college students with mental health conditions struggle with. We have done some testing of innovative cognitive remediation interventions to develop executive functioning skills, which we'll talk about more today. And we recently piloted this at a large 4-year state university. So from our research trials, we have learned some things that was like an aha moment. Well, moments, I should say, for me. And so when we asked students to identify what were the greatest barriers to their academic goals, they largely endorsed executive functioning skills over classic mental health condition symptoms. So things like time management, task management, prioritizing tasks, stamina, concentration, working memory. And this was a big moment for me because we had always been taught and we had been, trained to think about these things like depression and anxiety as the major barriers. So for me, this was like, wow, this makes perfect sense, right? You don't drop out of school or fail out of school necessarily because of these symptoms, but if you can't get your assignments done on time, if you never know where your stuff is, if you're constantly late, you don't know what's happening next, then that is a real reason, like a functional reason, why college students with mental health conditions may perform poorly. So we developed a executive functioning curriculum, which we'll talk about a little bit more later, to be able to focus really on how do you develop these skills systematically and purposefully. And we saw for those students that we taught, they had higher rates of academic persistence and experienced less barriers than those in the control condition. So by helping students to develop these skills, they also started to utilize services on campus better. And we know if you have a hard time organizing yourself and your things and your stuff, that you may struggle with utilizing outside resources too. And so in our work with disability services, CAPS, and career services, we also know, both from the literature and our experiences, that these groups typically feel really challenged to meet the complex needs of this group because they have a lot of complex needs, and largely that has to do with some of the skills that cannot or have not been developed largely because of their mental health condition. So we look at and how do we enhance academic performance. And so over time, we realized that there's this kind of system, or at least this is our working hypothesis, that as a result of having a mental health condition, that students really struggle with developing and refining executive functioning skills. So this is relatively new to the science, right? First, it was really focused on schizophrenia, but now has been expanded to affective conditions like depression and anxiety, so bipolar conditions. So when we start to think about what are the diagnoses we see on campus, these are largely those affective conditions and a small number of students or percentage of students that have some type of psychosis-related condition. But because executive functioning skills, these domains are underdeveloped because of their mental health condition, they really struggle with self-regulated learning. And we know that executive functioning skills are these kind of building blocks of self-regulated learning. So self-regulated learning is a set of skills and behaviors that are essentially become goal-directed performance, right? So like, you set a goal, how do you achieve it? And when you're a college student, that's really your main goal is getting into classes, staying in classes, and finishing the semester. So we started to think about like, well, how do we do this? And so we developed, based on Beth Twomley's work, compensatory cognitive remediation as a method to teach executive functioning skills. And by teaching executive functioning skills, we thereby develop self-regulated learning. We do that by embedding and revisiting academic goals periodically. And so when we then developed greater self-regulated learning use, it's been demonstrated in other literature, not our own, that greater self-regulated learning increases academic performance and retention. And why this is so important for this population, as you folks probably know, is that we have an estimated attrition rate of about 86% of this group. This is the largest attrition rate of any college student group, and they have multiple attempts at starting and stopping school. So HYPE on campus then is intended not to duplicate any services that are on campus, but rather act as a bridge between these three main services that students can or should utilize. So when we think about students with mental health conditions, they should be accessing disability services, they should be accessing counseling services or CAPS, and they should be accessing career services to be able to develop summer jobs or jobs during the semester. We know most of our students that go to school now also have some type of paid employment or unpaid employment that builds to a larger career. So HYPE on campus is intended to bridge these three services together and really strategically support this group on campus. So we don't provide the same services as disability services. We don't provide the same services as CAPS or career services, but rather we develop the skills and resources that students need to be able to effectively use these resources on campus. And we do that largely by coordinating with services, and that could be on and off campus. We know that many colleges do not provide long-term counseling services to students with a pre-existing mental health condition, as certainly ones that require longer types of services. Well, some colleges do. We love those colleges, but we know that as services are designed, that's not typically how it works. So then the HYPE on campus practitioner works to ensure that there are targeted accommodations and assistive technology based on the functional implications of that person's mental health condition. And in our discussions with lots of disability service providers, it's hard to be able to identify, like, how does bipolar affect this student versus that student. So you could have 5 students with the same diagnoses, but they're all affected differently in how they perform in class. So thinking about what are the things that we glean from services that we can help push up to disability services so that accommodations and assistive technology are more targeted for that condition, as well as working with the CAPS provider to say, like, oh, this student is really struggling with these things. Maybe you can address it in therapy. So being able to work with the student and their provider to be able to really focus and kind of tweak how services are provided to them on campus. So the idea is that we don't duplicate, but rather we ensure the effective utilization of the existing services on campus. We know that while disability services and CAPS providers and career services would love to provide more services, often they're not allowed or don't have the bandwidth to do so. So this HYPE on campus is intended to kind of bridge the gap, kind of create a safety net, if you will, underneath students so they don't kind of slip through the cracks. In our research, less than 25% of students who come into our prior studies are registered with disability services, which means that they go largely unrecognized on campus as a population that falls under protections of the ADA, but it also leaves them without required or essential services and supports like assistive technology and accommodations, but also increased access to learning centers, different type of registration assistance, and all of these things are real barriers for the students that we support. I want to talk a little bit about this curriculum that we have developed that has shown some good effectiveness in previous trials. This skill development by far is the cornerstone of HYPE on campus. And we believe that if you teach students skills, it may be slow at first, but if you teach them skills, then the reduction of service utilization is present, right? So this is what we see. And if they can start doing it for themselves, then they don't actually need paid providers, which is what we want for the long term as well. So while we focus on executive function skills in the curriculum, we do an array of whatever skill seems to be missing. We try to skill as we build around the accommodations and assistive technology or any other flexibility that students may need. So this component of HYPE on campus really focuses on this 12-week compensatory cognitive remediation approach, which essentially means we teach the skills and strategies to get around what lots of people experience. So in other types of cognitive remediation, they use kind of like computerized assessments and learning strategies. But this really teaches like, okay, so if you have difficulty with perspective memory, meaning time, task management, remembering information, then what are the skills and strategies you need to put in place to kind of short circuit that, right? So like if you have a hard time remembering things, you have a to-do list, and you have a really good calendar with reminders, right? And you chunk your tasks. So, and many students have not developed these skills or struggle to develop these skills. And so our curriculum then over time, we start with kind of foundational skills and strategies, and we build on top of that. So by the end of the 12 weeks, there's a sophisticated set of cognitive tools, strategies, and they essentially have a system that is developed specifically for performance in post-secondary ed. And what happens then is as we're teaching this and throughout the first semester, we're also meeting with students to affirm and to ensure that it's put into practice. Like, okay, so let's bust out our calendar and see like what we got going on in the next week and like how can we support you in that. So the idea is that we reinforce the skills and that it becomes a habit. The idea is that you can forget lots of things, but you no longer think about habits, you just do them. So we want to habitualize some of these behaviors and strategies so students rely on them, like we all do. Like if I took your calendar, you would not know what's happening tomorrow. We want students to rely on these strategies and systems to be able to reduce cognitive load and increase academic performance. So I want to take the rest of our time to talk a little bit about HYPE on campus, the trial. In the slides, will be referred to HOC just so it doesn't take up as much space. But please filter your questions through to Amanda and use the questions tab. Should you have any questions about the trial components or the intervention itself. So I'll talk a little bit about our research goals, like what's the intention of this trial. I really hate animation, so I don't know how this pops up like this. But our first phase is a feasibility pilot. So we'll be looking for universities. We would like to have 4-year state universities. One, because we think that it's like pretty generalizable to a larger student population. We are not Xing people out automatically based if they're not a 4-year state university. So in our feasibility pilot, we'll be looking for schools to participate, and it's essentially about like, how do we make this work here? So each college campus has some differences. They all are similar in certain types of ways, but we want to figure out like, how do we bridge these services and what does this person do to make it most effective for these other, our sister offices, disability services, CAPS, counsel, and career services. And then what needs to be tweaked on this campus or in general to be able to achieve the desired outcomes. So remember, our desired outcomes is increased academic persistence, and we measure that by satisfactory academic progress and increased academic performance. So some students do a good job with getting a pretty good GPA, and other students struggle, and it's largely from the cycling in and out, taking all withdrawals or lots of incompletes that turn to Fs or failing out a semester. So being able to figure out how do we get the desired outcomes on this campus, and some of that has to do with coordination of services, and if there's a tweak to the model, we're happy to do that too. The second phase is a pilot efficacy trial. And I think that says trail, so sorry for the typo. So the pilot efficacy trial would be a randomized control trial where we're really looking at, does this work? What are the critical interventions and services that support academic persistence? And what are the things that we learn from each individual school? And what are the student level factors that influence whether students drop out or stay in school? So our working hypothesis at this time is that there's some student level characteristics that may be malleable that we could affect to increase either mindset or approach or strategies to increase academic persistence. And then the third part, which we're not going to talk much about today because it'll be embedded in the larger trials, is how much does it cost to provide HYPE on campus? And this will just help us to educate other schools and universities and be able to account for things that we may take for granted, but that our administration doesn't. So thinking about what does it actually cost to provide HYPE on campus in a university setting. So I thought I would start with this. I said the timeline came later, but it's sometimes helpful for people to conceptualize what this looks like over time. So there is kind of like three phases. There's in fall 2020, this is where we're looking for schools to actively participate in preparing for the feasibility trial. And this is where, you know, we do the things like the MOUs, what seems reasonable, what doesn't, what kind of language, and we know universities have preferences for that. Identifying staff, so who on campus would be able to provide the support, and what office does it live in. We have some thoughts, but we're open to thinking about it with each individual school because of these differences. And we start with training and technical assistance during this time too. And practitioners do a little bit of practice. And that helps us to prepare for spring 2021, where the feasibility trial actually starts. And the feasibility trial is one semester. So it really focuses on like what's working, what's not working, and how do we enhance what we're doing to ensure that the efficacy trial works out well. So for any of you that have participated in research or conducted research, you know it's Murphy's Law. Whatever you think isn't, you know, you think everything's going to be fine, and then it's not. So we recognize that these things happen. We've had lots of those learnings. So to be able to better adjust for that, we have built in this time where we're kind of looking at those things. And so any learnings that come from the feasibility trial then influences the efficacy trial. And so this is not a fully powered trial. We'll really be doing a pilot. So that means that we'll be recruiting a fewer number of students. It's for one academic year, so a fall semester start through spring. And what we want to look at is, like, does this work here, and what seems to be working related to academic persistence and performance. So I'll talk a little bit more about each of the pilots, and then we'll have some time for questions. So the feasibility pilot, we're looking for 3 schools to participate. The idea is that it's one semester, we do some training, we provide some services, and we have some co-learning. So one thing about, this is very true for lots of research groups, but we want to be able to better understand, do people like it? So kind of like implementation outcomes, acceptability, appropriateness, and feasibility. Can people do it? Do they like to do it? And does it fit the need? And so as we're looking at those things, we're tweaking our approach as we go. And so this is bi-directional. We want feedback. Like, we hate this. We love this. Can we do it this way? Because it would be better. So any research study is better like that than in kind of like this unidirectional way where the researcher tells people, like, this is what you have to do. So we're looking at feasibility for one semester to tweak. 2 of the 3 campuses will move into the efficacy trial, which I'll talk about in a second. And this is one of our learnings from lots of prior trials. So the purpose of this, as I had earlier said, is to evaluate how to effectively link services on your campus. So what are the relationships and how do we leverage those between disability services, CAPS, and career services? When do we refer people to one place? When do we work with people? When do students, some are very autonomous, as they should be, and how do we support them without inserting ourselves? Whereas some other students require more accompaniment and more assistance. And so how do we do that in a way that is both respectful and partnering with these other services on campus? So the purpose of this section is really just to prepare. So we ask folks to, open trial means 10 people come in, new students, and we provide them the intervention and see how it goes. We want to be able to see, can we recruit students and can we retain them in both services and research? And this helps us, once again, to kind of tweak for the efficacy trial. The pilot efficacy trial, so in our previous experiences, we know that there are unanticipated things that happen on campus. I mean, I think that COVID-19 has illustrated that perfectly. But there are also smaller changes like administration changes, people go on leaves of absence, people resign, they retire. So there's a lot of movement in many offices. And so what sometimes happens is that a school then, while well-intended to move on, are not able to move on and complete the task of the research trial. And so if this is program development only, some of these things don't matter because you just go with the, it's how services are developed. So you go with the flow. Whereas in research trials, as you probably know, you're testing a specific intervention. And so it has to be controlled in particular types of ways. So that type of disruptions are like wreak havoc on what looks like your intervention outcomes, but it happens to be all these like contextual factors. So we're over recruiting for our feasibility to ensure that we have 2 high fidelity programs or schools coming into services. So we're looking for a total N of 80. So that means 40 students per campus. We'll be randomizing into 2 conditions, hype on campus and active control. So that means on campus, providers would be supporting 20 new students on hype on campus, and 20 students would be randomly assigned to an active control. So the active control is services as usual. We know colleges and universities do a good job with providing services. They may not hit all of the things that students with mental health conditions need, and so we want to be able to compare services as usual to hype on campus. So in addition to services as usual, our research staff would meet with the students, provide them with a critical campus resource packet that is like specifically tailored for your university, who to contact for what, and then we would connect students to campus resources if they're not already connected, disability services, CAPS, career services, the warm handoff. And so this would be helping the students get facilitating connected to services and not withdrawing or taking anything away that they would otherwise be able to access. Whereas hype on campus is services as usual, plus executive functioning skill development and specialized support. So the idea is that students within the first semester would get the standardized curriculum to develop executive functioning skills paired with specialized support. And what that means is, like, if you need a little additional help, if you're having a housing crisis, if you're struggling with your symptoms, if you are struggling with childcare, all these other things.
Hi, everyone. It looks like Michelle's having some issues with technology and audio, so we'll give her a second to reconnect. While she's doing that, I can answer. Oh, looks like she's actually on.
I'm back. I transferred the computer audio. I don't know what happened. Sorry, folks. That was so weird.
No problem. Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks, Amanda. I appreciate you filling the gap. So I think what I was saying, and this is like a test of working memory myself, is all the things that we know that can disrupt someone's academic performance that is either unanticipated or is cyclical. Then services, hype on campus works really quickly to coordinate services with other branches at school, as well as off-campus providers. So that often the half hour, so the 1.5 hours is a combination of the skill development curriculum as well as additional supports. So during the efficacy trial, we also ask for program staff to be able to, so this would be the hype practitioner, to update and keep accurate data on the services that are provided, as well as their participation in TA. So the intention of the efficacy trial, oh, I think I have another slide actually. So before I say that, here we go. So we anticipate that services for the first semester looks more intense, and that's because you're doing strategic and intentional skill development and targeting how do we increase the self-regulated learning skills and academic persistence. And we anticipate, and what typically has happened over time, is that students' need for services decrease because they're effectively being able to manage these things on their own. So while things come up, issues with financial aid, registration, housing crisis, medication change, any of these things, we would anticipate that even if students don't need weekly meetings, that they can get services as needed. The distinction I like to make is the intensity versus criticality. So sometimes services are critical, but they're just one time, right? And this could be a thing about financial aid or being on probation, like something that is time critical that influences a future trajectory. So while we anticipate services are like relatively intense for the first semester, we anticipate that less services are needed over time. So students participate for one academic year in services, but then we follow them for an additional semester to check the durability of HYPE on campus. So the idea is we do this, that service utilization in certain ways decreases, in other ways increases. So utilization alone is not a metric that we're studying, but we want to be able to see, does academic persistence endure over time? Does this intervention that teaches these things and habitualizes this type of self-regulated learning and effective access to services, does this increase people's ability to stay on campus for longer, to graduate, to move on to working, internships, whatever the case may be for that student during that semester. So after the trial is over in January 2023, students who are assigned to the active control can then receive HYPE on campus. And campuses after that time are free to provide HYPE on campus to any student who wants it or needs it. And so we'll talk a little bit at the end about what are some of the benefits for this type of participation. We know that not all students who need the service will get the service during the trial. So increasing the school's capacity to develop and to provide this type of support may be something that you're interested in. So I'll tell you a little bit about the research participants, what we're looking for. So we know that not all students with mental health conditions struggle academically. Some of them do very well and don't really need additional services. And to be able to both say that these students were in need, as well as kind of thinking about what we need to be able to publish this, we are looking for students who have had at least one prior academic disruption due to their mental health condition. The reason why we look for students like this, one, is that with a prior academic disruption, you are more inclined to have future academic disruptions. And so we classify academic disruptions as not meeting satisfactory academic progress. And I believe that most of you know what that is, but in the event that some of us don't, SAP is a metric used by federal financial aid to be able to identify if students are moving at the pace that they should to be able to graduate within a reasonable amount of time. And what that usually means is completing 2/3 of your coursework with a GPA of 2 or higher. So when students fall under SAP, they jeopardize their financial aid, as well as their enrollment in their school, right? So this is where we see students on academic probation. So students who meet that criteria of not meeting satisfactory academic progress, that is an academic or prone to an academic disruption. Also those who have dropped out because of mental health condition, taken a medical leave of absence, and who, I guess, dropped out is when you don't go back to school mid-semester, but have taken all withdrawals, failed all their classes. So you kind of get the idea. So this is related to the mental health condition. So it's not just like, oh, I had a better time hanging out with my friends. That may be bad judgment. But this is related to their mental health condition, either symptoms or something along those lines. Lack of access to treatment. We're looking for young adults specifically, so we would like to have traditional college students. We know that students are taking longer to finish, they're delaying entrance into school. So we're looking for young adults between 18 and 30, undergraduates. We're looking for folks who have a mental health condition only. So we are not excluding those with learning disabilities, because we recognize that there's a fair amount of overlap between learning disabilities and mental health conditions, but students who have a secondary diagnosis of autism, TBI, or any other neurological condition that affects cognition, they are excluded from this trial. And it's really just to be able to say, like, this is a homogeneous population, mental health conditions. But as you know, because you serve these folks, that even just mental health conditions, that slice of the pie is really diverse, heterogeneous, right? So like we can have lots and lots of different types of diagnoses on campus. And so this is our way of kind of limiting the slice a little bit. So students have to be currently enrolled in school, returning from academic disruption, previously had an academic disruption, obviously, are full-time, so enrolled in at least 4 full credit courses. We have struggled with this idea of, 2 classes, 3 classes. We believe that the full-time students is where we should be directing our efforts at this time. It's not to say in the future we will not look at part-time students, but full-time students, 4 classes plus, and expect to maintain matriculation for the next 2 years. So we're following students for 1.5 years, 3 semesters for them. So that is a condition or a criteria that we may flex a little bit, where they expect to be in school for 3 semesters in the future. In the past, we've had the next 2 years, so we can follow them through. So this is where we want your help. All right, so now we're going to talk about like our partner schools and what our ideal campus is. So if this has piqued your interest at all, which I'm hopeful that it has, we're looking for campuses, like I had said, that ideally are 4-year state universities. We recognize that that may not be possible, but we encourage those who are interested to apply. But what we're really looking for outside of the structure are campuses that have good working relationships with their sister offices, and the ability to be able to expand their bandwidth or capacity for new students coming in for services. So we think that Hype on Campus best fits in disability services, but we recognize that each campus is different, so we're open to thinking about this otherwise. So in some type of student service at a learning center, so thinking about what it looks like for your campus and what does inter-office coordination look like, we're open to all those types of discussions. We know that, once again, this is kind of like a similar group, but also very different. We're also looking for schools with a type of campus climate. So we would like a college campus that has policies and procedures that support students with mental health conditions. Sometimes we have policies and procedures that are put into place that are intended to mitigate risk, but essentially it increases risk by driving students underground and does not make them feel safe with disclosure or seeking services. So thinking about your campus policies and if you're mental health friendly is something that's particularly important to us. We also like campuses that have leaders from all over the campus, right? So within disability services, counseling services, administration. So a climate where this type of approach is appreciated and they want to do better for this population. As we know, this population is rising on campus, and so thinking about how we meet that need is important, and we're hopeful that Hype on Campus addresses some of the things that campuses are struggling with. So talking a little bit about capacity, we would like for campuses to have a skilled practitioner to provide the service. And so some people say, well, we don't have an extra person, but we can hire someone, and we have good track record in hiring effective people. So as you know, that sometimes the intervention is only as good as the provider. So we will be thinking in partnership about who is the best type of provider for this intervention. Those that have been trained in mental health can be very good. Those who are trained in social work could be very good. occupational therapists are often excellent in this role because they are really skill focused. There are lots of folks who could do a great job in this role, those who are trained in education, but thinking through what that means for you in your office and where this is housed, we would like to be partners with you in that. The school should have the capacity to serve 10 students in the feasibility trial, kind of like that testing. Is this working? What do we need to learn? And then 20 in the efficacy trial. What we also hope is that services can be responsive on campus. So just as like programmatically to be able to respond and engage participants within 2 days of randomization and provide services within a week of referral. Some folks would be thinking like, oh, we don't have the bandwidth for that, like we're backlogged. Once again, we can talk about this and think about how this works in practice. And once again, we're looking for alignment. So I often say I can teach anyone anything within reason. Like I can't teach the astronauts that are going up in SpaceX today about what to do up there, but like within reason, I can teach people lots of things. But in this type of trial, I hope not to have to teach or to align people's values. So we're looking for programs both within schools and schools largely that shares the same type of values and passion we have for college students with mental health conditions. And like I said earlier, this is a partnership for the folks who like that kind of reciprocal relationship where feedback is given freely and respectfully, but with the intention of like, we are co-developing something that we want to live here and to be effective for this group. So we want all the feedback that you can give us, and we hope to give helpful feedback as well. So I'll talk a little bit about the campus commitments, and please, if you have any questions that you're thinking about regarding that portion of the discussion, please plop it in the questions tab, and Amanda will help facilitate discussion at the end. So we'll talk a little bit about commitments. I talked about this briefly earlier, but our campus commitment for the feasibility trial is in the fall. We do kind of these kind of low, in some ways it's actually a higher lift or a heavier lift for some of our folks. But we'll be looking at the MOU and structuring that so that it is agreeable to both parties. We'll identify campus staff. We will identify who is the supervisor and who are the liaisons between the offices so that we can effectively communicate. Your folks will participate in training and both some group and individual technical assistance. We asked for people in the fall, once we kind of got the details hammered out and the MOU looking good, to start practicing with 2 participants. They could be existing students there, and participate in a fidelity review. So the idea of the fidelity review is that we just get a good baseline of what you guys are doing now so that we can see how things change over time. In our previous experience, some of you may be thinking, is it just one person? And so to serve 20 people, it is one person. We like to train 2 because of our attrition issues to ensure that you have a backup. So thinking about like if you have 2 providers that you train, having both providers provide some level to existing students to be able to gain some familiarity is something that's smart to do. And so then in the spring 2021 is where we take in 10 new students, and this has no random assignment. So this is what we would consider an open trial where people just come in. So recruitment isn't very difficult. We think about like, okay, is there anyone that CAPS knows of that would be super helpful? We do some recruitment on campus. We flyer, we put out a Facebook and Instagram ad, and that usually gives us more students than we need. And so then in spring 2021, at the conclusion of the feasibility trial, you'll be preparing for a site visit and fidelity review. So we don't really know what fall and spring will look like, right? On campus, most of the schools on this call right now probably have no idea. Or at least have some idea about what semester is going to look like. We'll college students be on campus? Will they only some of them be on campus, mostly be online? Will they be released after Thanksgiving? Will they not be? So we really don't know. So the site visit is in air quotes because we don't know if we'll be actually coming to your place or if we'll be doing it in some ways remotely. But the idea is that we get a good sense of what type of services were provided. And so this green lights people to move, our campuses to move through to the efficacy trial. So, and largely this has to do with like, are you doing it the way so that we can say in the trial that this is hyped to fidelity, or is it a version that works for your campus, but not necessarily for the research trial? So the efficacy trial, this is for the academic year 2021 to 2022. And this is where you're providing services to up to 20 people. You have to provide services, high fidelity, hype on campus services, and enter data in a timely way. We know that people struggle with this. And so we would work with you and your school to identify like what is the best way to get us data. Is it through your own electronic health record? Is it through an external source like a REDCap link from our school? So thinking about that, that takes some time to think about and to set up. And then you would be providing us with semester transcripts, unofficial semester transcripts for all participants in the active group, active control, or hype on campus. And then you would be participating in bi-weekly or monthly technical assistance and some periodic fidelity assessments. So technical assistance is developed and then titrated based on your staff's needs and your office needs and your campus needs. So it really is highly dependent on what you want, what you need, and what we see in both the service provision logs as well as from students, the data that we collect from them directly. So here are the benefits components. So we think that this is we hope that it's helpful for you. We're hoping that's the purpose, right? So we're hoping that this kind of fills a gap that we're seeing in our experience on campus, and that it's both innovative and cutting edge, being able to merge support, executive functioning, executive skill development, as well as the use of cognitive remediation. People really like that. You get free and tailored technical assistance to your campus. Your campus then develops hopefully a new set of skills and tools to enhance persistence and prevent disruptions of this population. And then we could also help to evaluate and your outcomes, right? So we'll be kind of privy to that, at least with the hype on campus students, and then to improve the outcomes of this population, and then help you describe your impact to your administration, your board of trustees, and your other stakeholders. We know when these folks get excited about it, funding really opens up. So thinking about these benefits, we're hoping that if you're not intrinsically alone interested in doing this, that some of these benefits you can see would be helpful to your campus and to your staff. So what happens next? So we are in the process of identifying ideal partners. And so some folks have reached out to us individually prior to this call. Applications will be posted on June 21st, both on our website and distributed to anyone who had registered for this webinar, in addition to the slides. Perhaps the audio, I'm not sure it'll be helpful. So applications will be posted and distributed next week. We hope that between this webinar, for those of you that are interested, and when the applications are posted, that you kind of field interest on your campus to see if the other key and sister offices and administration are interested in partnering on something like this. We are happy to have individual discussions with folks about what this looks like, what are your questions, and any further details. So please do not hesitate to reach out to us. This is our email address, which is hype@umassmed.edu. So the applications will be due on June 21st. We'll do individual site calls between June 29th and the 10th. And then we'll identify our sites by July 24th. So the idea is we hope that that gives people a good amount of time, but in addition allows us to have enough and conversations with people on campus to be able to think through, like, okay, is this the best fit? Does this fit a need? Are you interested? And how can we be helpful? So it's both you getting more information about us and us gathering some more information from you. So some of the application stuff is like very basic, like what are the demographics of your campus? Do your disability services, CAPS and counseling and career services typically work together? Really kind of bare bones things. It's just for us to have a sense of like who's applying, what type of school, what's their demographic, the geographic location, things like that. So it shouldn't be a heavy lift. We do ask for a letter of support from someone higher in the administration, just to show that there is institutional buy-in to this approach. And so that may be one of the things that may take a little bit more time or effort. So just having that on your radar. So I want to now transition over to any questions that you may have. So I do want to make note, if some of you are thinking like, oh, we love this, but we don't really love the idea of research, or we don't want to wait that long. So we are also open to doing helping programs develop on campus. So if that should be of interest to you, please let us know. But outside of that, I will give you our contact information. And then Amanda, do we have any questions from the group?
We do. So we had a lot of great questions. One of them I thought you could comment on, Michelle, because it's been asked a couple times, is a little bit of clarity on what this university will be asked to cover cost-wise and what we will be covering cost-wise, should someone volunteer to participate.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. And so our intention is to help supplement the cost of services on campus. So thinking through like sustainability, we're unable to provide funding moving forward forever. So thinking about your services on campus, sustainability may be a portion of your decision. So can we start services like this and continue services? We do have a somewhat of a long research agenda for HYPE on campus. So we are happy to think through what are some permutations of HYPE on campus that may be helpful for some sites to think about. Probably not for this research trial, though, for the future, like individual services versus group-based services. So thinking about how much does it cost and sustainability. We can't say at this point what is the amount of money that we're able to contribute, but if you're thinking for yourself, like, hey, I could do this if we had these types of resources, that is certainly very helpful to be thinking through. So we encourage you to reach out to us so we can be good thought partners on what are the resources that we have to provide. It is also very helpful to know how much a practitioner on your campus costs. So what does a typical disability service provider look like who has some experience? That is a factor into the amount of support. So I know that seems like a vague answer, but we're also happy as we learn more about you to think about like what are the ways that we can mutually support this trial. Now, to say this project is NIDLR funded, we are hoping to apply for more funding and from different funders, but NIDLR as a funder does not provide additional indirect costs, so the indirect costs come out of your direct costs. So what that means is that it's not really designed to support research. Service provision, rather. It's designed to support research, but not the service provision. So thinking about like, how is this affordable on your campus? Super helpful to think about that, and we would contribute in that partnering. If anyone's interested in thinking about that, we're happy to think about that with you.
Thanks, Michelle. Another good question that just came up is if you could speak a little bit more about what is included in the 12-week curriculum that you referenced.
Oh, sure, yeah. So the 12-week curriculum focuses on major cognitive domains like perspective memory, cognitive flexibility, decision-making, note-taking. So those those larger kind of concepts like perspective memory, like broken down, what we really focus on is time and task management. How do you develop a system where if you don't have a great working memory or perspective memory, like what are the things that you can put into place that act as your supports? So we teach calendaring skills, to-do lists. We kind of go back to some of the basics related to what are ways that you can build in those types of skills and supports into your everyday. Like if you constantly forget something, how about you put a sticky note on your, your front door that says, remember to grab this. So like really kind of like tricks of the trade. But then we also really focus on inhibitory control, which is like, how do you reduce distraction in your life? So we know that some students struggle with internal distraction, and some students, almost all students, all people, have to manage external distractions. So thinking about cell phone use, how do you set up your area so that you minimize your own distraction? How do you set up a system so that you're able to do the things that you want, but not in the moment? So if you want to pick up your cell phone, but you're studying, what are the strategies that you put into your place, that you put your cell phone down or you hide it? So we work on things that are critical to be able to maintain sustained attention, to be able to maintain organization, both physical and cognitive organization. We focus on how do you stay present, so task attention, conversational attention, learning, verbal learning, visual learning, and we build in strategies like the use of self-talk, for instance, or visualization. So these strategies that you think about, when you start learning how to read, people tell you, like, develop a story in your mind and develop that picture, and that will help your memory. So some of it is going back to the basics and kind of like dredging up those things to be able to use as strategies. So the way that it works in the curriculum is that we start pretty basic. And then after you learn a skill, it is repeated and practice, and then you build on top of each other. So the way that I think about this, for any of you that have young kids, there's this movie called Cars, and this one car, he got in trouble in a local town, and he had to pave a road. And he just wanted to get out of this town so he could get to his race. He was a car. And so he did it like super fast, super quick, and like was done in a night. But it was sloppy and it wasn't durable. So over time and pretty quickly, it started to like break up, and like you could see the fissures, and it was no longer functional. It looks pretty initially, but no longer functional. And so the idea here, well, they made him rip it up and start again, and then he had like the long process of doing it correctly. So the idea here is if you lay the foundation pretty strong, and then you start to build more sophisticated skills and strategies on top of that, that at the when you're done, you have a sophisticated yet durable system that students can lean on. So the idea is that students are in some ways like wildly disorganized, always late for appointments, they don't show up, they're late for class, they don't turn in their work on time, their work is like does not have the required time spent to be able to have a good product. And so there's a lot of like the spinning of the wheels. And so what happens is that students start to lose equity with their professors and their supporters, but really this is just a symptom of not having strong executive functioning skills. How do you plan to do a task? How do you break down a 20-page paper into manageable chunks that you can then get done, in 3 weeks instead of like trying to do an all-nighter? So this idea of developing this set of skills that students who are smart enough to get into your school then have the ability to kind of lean hard on the system so that they can effectively get work done well. And so one of the things that I like most about this intervention is that it's both individualized and standardized. So it's somewhat script-like. You ask for a goal, you write it down, it tells you what game to play, you do something, you help to reinforce a strategy that they should be learning, and that builds over time. But students there's a huge focus on perspective memory. And that is like remembering to remember, right? Like, so how do you set up a calendar that works for you? Is it electronic? Is it paper? How do you leverage to-do lists? Do you do it weekly? Do you do it daily? Do you do it daily and weekly? How much of that shows up in your calendar? And all of this is kind of like this dance, because everyone's system is different, but figuring out what works for a person. And so the thing that comes out of it that is the strongest, I think, is the ability to do time and task management. And when you think about school, students have 4 or 5 bosses that don't care what the other ones want, right? So you have to meet the demands, the competing demands of all of your professors, and figure out how to get all of that work done, especially during crunch time, midterms, finals. And so time and task management then is like a real premium. And what we've seen during COVID is that these students were sent home without these skills, then learning online and trying to manage that online environment with the inadequate skills. It's like white knuckling it. They're just spinning their wheels, trying to get organized, trying to figure out what happens next. What do I need to get done now? Where do I find these things online? I mean, so what we see right now is that executive functioning skill development is a real premium for this population. And students want to do well, they don't want to fail, and they don't want to burn through equity with their supporters or their professors, but they just don't have the skill set to be able to manage these components of academic life. It's not because they're not smart enough, it's because of the way that their mental health affects them in a a neurological way. So teaching the skills and strategies. And one of our earlier research trials, we found that if you teach them, they'll use it, right? So it's not like you're teaching them and they're like, yeah, forget it, I don't want to do this. They're hungry for it. You teach them, they use it because it makes their life easier, and they're not white knuckling it as much. So I hope that's a helpful answer. We're happy to send out the table of contents, or if you reach out to us, we're happy to walk you through the intervention so you can see it a little bit more.
Thanks, Michelle. We actually are over time, but I had sent some initial answers to each question in the chat, and I would say for the rest of you, if you have additional questions, like Michelle said, to not hesitate to reach out via the contact information on the screen. I don't know if you have any other closing comments, but I will leave it at that.
Yeah, no, thank you guys. We appreciate your attendance. Hopefully we'll hear from some of you soon. Take good care.